Pozdravljam sve uvažene goste i želim najaviti profesoricu Judith Reisman koja će nam održati najavljeno predavanje. On behalf of the Andrija Štamper School of Public Health, University of Zagrebu School of Medicine, I would like to welcome you here and to give you the opportunity to have a lecture here. Also, the lecture is the influence of hypersexualization of society on the development of human personality. Predavanje je organizirano u suradnji sa Akademijom medicinskih znanosti Hrvatske, pa bih željela zamoliti profesoricu Lipo Zenčić, predsjednicu Akademije, da se obrati s par riječi.
Sve srdačno pozdravljam u ime jednog od organizatora i želim vam dobrodošlicu. Dear Professor Reisman, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you here in Zagreb and on your presentation here as one of the organizers. Croatian Academy of Medical Sciences is welcoming you here and thank you for coming and give us a wonderful lecture. Thank you. Thank you very much.
U ime Medicinskog fakulteta ovdje je prisutan i naš gospodin dekan akademik Davor Miličić, pa bih ga zamolila da kaže riječ dvije.
Thank you, distinguished Dr. Reisman, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome Dr. Reisman, but I welcome also the audience today, because we will have, I'm sure, an interesting lecture. We are the part of university, and university should be open and democratic institution. It should be tolerant and it should be susceptible for many different opinions, many different views, many different theories, and we have to be polite. We have to follow the scientific results that we share with the world scientific community, but we also School of Medicine, and the School of Medicine has another dimension, a dimension which includes disputing about humanity, about sense of living, about welfare of the human being, and therefore I think this kind of lectures are appropriate. Dependence on the ideas, dependence on the orientation. Only what is important is their favoring everything which is humane, which is in concordance with our mission as medical doctors. We have to respect human life, we have to follow what is the best in our medical ethics and deontology. We don't have to make any, we mustn't have any doubts regarding the sense of human life and regarding human well-being. Therefore, I invite you to be tolerant, to be critical, to be polite, and to enjoy the lecture we are going to hear.
Evo, ja se također zahvaljujem na vašem odazivu na ovu tribinu u ime organizatora dolaska doktorice Judith Reisman u Hrvatsku. Srčno vas pozdravljam i željela bih vam reći, iako smatram da ne treba osobno puno predstavljati, evo nije na odmet reći nekoliko riječi o njoj. Dakle, doktorica znanosti Judith Reisman rođena je u njemačko-ruskoj obitelji kao druga generacija američkih Židova, po vjeroispovijesti u židovskoj obitelji, te je odrasla u atmosferi izrazite naklonosti prema socijalističkoj ideji društva. Nakon teške obiteljske tragedije potaknuta je promijeniti komunističku ideologiziranost njezina mentalnog obrasca ponašanja. Doktorirala je komunikologiju, i specijalizirala mas medije. Osobno razočarana činjenicom da u društvu obrazovanih nedostaje intelektualne znatiželje i životnosti i primijetivši manjak zdravog razuma počne istraživati utjecaj seksualne revolucije na razvoj ljudske osobnosti, seksualno nasilje nad ženama i djecom kao i utjecaj pornografije na djecu. Najveći dio vremena svojeg znanstvenog i društvenog djelovanja posvetila je raskrinkavanju rada doktora Alfreda Kissija, takozvanog oca seksualne revolucije, čija su djela oblikovala suvremeni spolni odgoj i utjecala na zapadnjačku seks kulturu. Autorica je mnogih znanstvenih radova, te je objavljivala u mnogim eminentnim svjetskim časopisima povezanim sa tematikom koja se bavi, tipa Social Biology i mnogim drugim znanstvenim časopisima i novinama. Svojedobno je bila također imenovana povjerenicom vlade SAD-a u međunarodnim istraživanjima o prevarama u znanosti, zlostavljanju djece, pornografiji, zlouporabi droga i ostalim kritičnim pitanjima našega vremena. Dakle, za svoja zalaganja i dostignuća proteklih 40 godina od kada se bavi ovom tematikom, nagrađena je s 30 nagrada od medija, civilnog društva, znanstvenih radova. Za kraj, prije nego što predam riječ doktorici Reisman i prije nego što vas ona uvede u svoje izlaganje, pozivam vas da se zadržimo na civilizacijskom nivou demokratskog društva 21. stoljeća, pa ću u to ime vrlo napredno za svoje vrijeme citirati Voltera, koji je rekao: ne slažem se s vašim mišljenjem, ali ću do kraja braniti vaše pravo da ga branite. Zahvaljujem i predajem riječ doktorici Judith Reisman.
Thank you very much. And thank you. Of course, I didn't understand a word she said, but you know, we pursue anyway. And science crosses all boundaries, we hope. And we do believe that the presentation of facts should be a primary. I thank you for this distinguished venue and for these distinguished representatives of the medical profession and you future people who will be representing the medical profession, I assume to a greater or lesser extent in your lives, and who will be devoted to the health and the welfare of children and of Croatians in general and wherever you go. So I hope to contribute to that today with some of my information. Moving right along, I was drawn to Croatia based upon an experience that had taken place on your public television, where a young woman, Carolina, I'm sorry, it's been a long couple of days, Carolina was addressing the Kinsey issue. She had broadcast some segments from a documentary that I had appeared in and that one of my colleagues, Timothy Tate, UNESCO award-winning filmmaker and Amnesty International award-winning filmmaker, had been very much involved in. And parts of his material were there and a few other people. And Carolina, good heavens, was unfortunately disciplined, if you will. That to me was unconscionable because as a journalist she was fulfilling her role, her appropriate, doing the job that she was supposed to be doing. That is present the material and then allow people to make their own decisions about whether it was good or bad. So I came here initially on that impetus and also then became involved in issues regarding human sexuality, the coursework that's coming into Croatia through one of your professors who trained at the Kinsey Institute. So the Kinsey Institute and Kinsey becomes completely interlocked. And therefore I thought it would be helpful if I presented to you some of the information that I have gleaned and my colleagues have gleaned over the last several decades regarding this very important man. How many of you have ever heard of Kinsey? Oh, well, all right. Okay. So, anybody here see the Kinsey film with Liam Neeson? Yeah? Okay. Some did see. Yeah, so the Kinsey Institute in 2003, which operates in Indiana under the auspices of the Indiana University, the Kinsey Institute published a book which they titled Kinsey, The Man Who Has Changed the World. Now, that's a bold title. And that includes Croatia, does it not? And therefore, if that is true, and I believe that it is true, then that becomes extremely important for you here in Croatia to ponder, to consider, and to investigate. My argument, as I will proceed, will be Kinsey, the pedophile who changed the world. Now, is everybody here familiar with the word pedophile? Yeah? When I started my research, I used the word pedophile. Everyone thought I was talking about someone who liked to ride a bicycle. You think it's funny, but we were that naive in those years. And there's a lot we could talk about in regard to that. But it's not a man who likes to ride a bicycle. Now, we were looking at this whole background historically about Judeo-Christian nations, and the question was, how did we move from cultures that had nurtured basically the innocence of children, we define that as innocence, to cultures that really have been turning children into hypersexual objects. And how did that happen in roughly 3 generations? I will urge all of you to go to our major public and privately owned or public television station, nonprofit that is, C-SPAN. I have a 2-hour presentation that I gave for C-SPAN on lectures in history, the 20th century, sex, science, and the law, when I lectured to the law school students at Liberty University. I urge you to go and take a look at that lecture. It will be much more intense than mine. So, who was Alfred Kinsey? According to Human Events, Alfred Kinsey's reports, that's an American conservative sort of magazine, but Alfred Kinsey reports were the most harmful American books of the 19th and the 20th centuries. As we pointed out, there was a film produced starring a very popular actor, Liam Neeson, and a popular actress, Laura Linney, called Kinsey, Let's Talk About Sex. And I did see that film. It's an interesting thing to discuss. Laura Linney, who played Mrs. Kinsey, said, everyone's sex education in the past 50 years came right from the Kinsey Institute. That she followed up with saying, Kinsey changed our culture completely. So, we're now on a query. We're on a journey together. In 1989, the National Research Council, a very prestigious group in the United States, said, our sex knowledge divides into the biblical pre-Kinsey and they didn't call it anti-biblical, and the post-Kinsey eras. And they said this in AIDS, sexual behavior, and intravenous drug use. And I would agree that it does divide. I speak to you as an American, so I have to refer to our historical context. Pre-Kinsey, we were talking about a libel of the World War II, what we called Greatest Generation. Tom Brokaw, very famous journalist in the United States, did several books on the Greatest Generation. What he said was, this was a generation that had faith in God. It was part of the generation. Fidelity was part of that. Responsibility, a commitment to honesty. He said that is how they were raised. Now, the question became, this was a very conservative generation, extremely conservative. I'm old enough to remember that. And that would be something that the world has moved away from. Kinsey's research, however, took place during World War II, in which he wrote sexual behavior in the human man, sexual behavior in the human female. We have on page 10, I hope there's going to be a slide up here about that, his documents, his statements about what percentage of the people he interviewed during World War II, and that was roughly 80%. Now, during World War II, I can't speak to what was going on in Croatia, but in the United States of America, no one involved in that war, no serviceman, nobody working in any military capacity could speak to Dr. Kinsey about anything at all personal. It was impossible. So then the question became, who did he talk to come up with the conclusions that 90-some% of men engage in a whole variety of sexual activities and were just hypocrites and hid that from the world? Rockefeller Foundation marketed Kinsey's statistical lies, saying that World War II, what we called our heroes in those years, were wanton sex hypocrites. These are images that were very carefully placed by the Kinsey Institute. Kinsey was on the front cover of every newspaper when his research came out, in every major publication. Millions of dollars of marketing went in to marketing the Kinsey report to the American public and thereby to the rest of the world. And what people didn't really know was about this little man down here who was a pimp. That is, he would collect prostitutes and so forth. And he was also a sex partner of Dr. Alfred Kinsey. From a scientific perspective, the fact that this information was not known, was hidden, in fact, becomes a problem in terms of the actual data that were collected. Future filmmakers, writers, millions trusted Kinsey, saying that our tough sex laws were based on fantasy and not on our real sexual nature. Therefore, there he is down here at the bottom. This is Berkeley, University of Berkeley in California. Our future leaders of our nation, also in Portugal, in Canada, in Europe, in the United Kingdom. Here's Kinsey at the Student Union University of Copenhagen, 1955, and he was quite welcomed by everybody because they believed that he was bringing the truth about human sexuality to the university. Anybody here familiar with a guy named Phil Donahue? Are you? I really ask seriously because I don't know. Yeah? Yeah? Okay. Well, he was very famous, extremely famous, television host in the United States. I appeared on Phil Donahue's program in 1990. That is Phil Donahue looking up at one of the charts, the sexual behavior of children, youngest being 2 months of age. Sexual behavior for children 2 months of age. These children were being timed with a stopwatch. They were being manipulated. They were being, masturbated, this is a medical school, masturbated by adult males around the clock to attain what Kinsey called an orgasm. Donahue said, look, we based an entire generation of sexologists on Kinsey, and Kinsey was a dirty old man. And then he said, but he wasn't. The guy was married once, a nuclear family kind of guy. And here is his colleague, a psychologist who wrote extensively, Kinsey's photographer, C.A. Tripp, who said, on this program, on record, I won't say anything here that's not on record, that's not documented, that's not fact. Tripp said, Kinsey listened to pedophiles. They were very careful. They used stopwatches. They knew how to record their thing. Donahue asked, well, were they in prison at the time? Tripp replied, certainly not. They were trained observers. Now, I don't know how much you have studied the scientific method, but I don't think that there's a great deal of question as to whether it is science to hire pedophiles to sexually molest children and tell the world about child sexuality. Do you? Anybody here see that as science? It can't be science. Donahue was looking at table 34. Examples of multiple orgasm in pre-adolescent males. Some instances, said Kinsey, of higher frequencies. In this particular chart or table, straight out of his book, page 180, and I certainly urge you all to please get sexual behavior in the human male and verify everything that I say. You can go on my website, you can verify things there. The youngest child here is how old? Can you see that? 5 months old. Allegedly, how many orgasms? 3 orgasms, okay. Then there's a 4-year-old, 26, there's the 5-month-old. 26 orgasms in 24 hours. You're medical people. How do you do that? Does anybody ask? How do you do that? 26 orgasms in 24 hours. Examples of multiple orgasms in pre-adolescent males. Well, then I looked to see what Kinsey called an orgasm. And on page 160, 161, you have a chart there. He reported, he said, 6 types of orgasm among 196 boys under 12 years of age. He said 8% were fighting. He broke it out into statistics, and so apparently that's supposed to be science. The Nazi scientists claimed to be engaged in science as well. No one relies on Nazi scientific data today, do they? No one. Much less to teach it in schools and universities as accurate science. Fighting a partner, 8%, rigid throbs, 22%, sadism, hysteria, 5%, convulsions, cries, 17%, fainting, collapse, 3%, twitching, spasms, so on. This was defined by Dr. Kinsey as orgasm, and he said they enjoyed this experience. Well, when you examine these data critically, which seems to be when you examine these data critically, the father of the sexual revolution turns out to have been an impotent. He was impotent for very good reasons. You all know what S/M means these days? Sadomasochistic, bi-homosexual, we don't know which, but anyway, one or the other. Pornography addict, a masturbation addict, and a pederast psychopath. Now that's a lot to say about someone who's supposed to be a psychiatrist. Not psychiatrist. He was a zoologist. Someone who's supposed to be the father of human sexuality education. And by the way, these are all documented. I don't say that about sadomasochism or anything else, unless it's in the record, and in the record from his own people, admissions by his own representatives. Okay, Kinsey used sex and violence without conscience, and he was violating social norms, which we're talking about the definition of a psychopath. A psychopath is one who can use sex and violence without conscience, violating social norms without guilt or remorse. And from that point of view, Robert Hare, very well-known author of various books on psychopaths and psychopathology, defined really what took place with Dr. Kinsey. We ask then, what happened? In 1955, the Rockefeller Foundation funded a national model penal code. Now, that model penal code was based upon Kinsey's two books, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female. All of their sexual changes in the sex laws were based upon these two books. These two books, sex science, would replace the common law. In the United States, it would legalize abortion, no-fault divorce, sodomy, gay marriage, pornography, sex education, a whole variety of things that were not common in those years. So a body of research was established to change those laws. What were the laws? Age of consent in the United States was 16, was commonly 18, it could be 21. Now, depending upon how you're looking at it, it could be 12 to 18 years old. Rape in those years, death in 18 states. Life in 22. That doesn't mean you killed him, but that was the law. Today, it can be for rape, 6 months to 4 years, it depends. Fornication and cohabitation was against the law, and now, and it would get prison or fines, and now we're taught fornication and cohabitation in our schools, and now some of that is coming down the pike in some of your sex education, but it doesn't look like you've gotten into that as deeply as we have, and as the United Kingdom has, and other countries have. Seduction, that is whispering sweet nothings, you know, into the little girl's ear and saying, "I just love you, but we can't wait." Okay, well that brought prison and or fines. Today, of course, it's legal under the idea that somebody always, that you can't tell she gave consent. Adultery was prison or fines. Now it's decriminalized. Divorce was fault divorce. Now we have no fault divorce, no alimony, which has resulted in massive poverty for single women. Child custody commonly went to the mother. Now it's financially based. Abortion was absent unless there were grounds, and it was punished. And now, of course, in our schools, abortion is taught as absolutely legal and appropriate. Sodomy, which was oral or you know, all forms of sodomy. Prison or fines, and now, of course, in our schools, this is taught as legal. Okay? Yeah, in our schools, that's the case, as part of sex education. Now, you can go on my website and get this. You're not going to be able to really read it all, but, and I did bring some copies if you are interested. The Model Penal Code removed protections for women and children, is what actually happened. From 1948, the jury of your peers was usurped. This, you don't bother reading, but we looked into the number of legal cases that were citing Kinsey and law journals that were citing. We have thousands of law journals and legal cases that cite Kinsey's research as accurate and therefore affecting changes in law and changes in treatment, even at the medical level. Now, this is very interesting because in 1953, there's a man named Hugh Hefner. Anybody hear of him? I love the laughter, yeah. Okay. It's a man named Hugh Hefner. Now, what's really interesting is Hugh Hefner, like most guys in the 1950s in the United States of America, was a virgin, and he wasn't necessarily bragging when he admitted that, but he was a virgin. That's the way people kind of were in those years. And a little old-fashioned, you may say. Well, informal sex education. Hugh Hefner said that he had read Kinsey's book. He was no longer going to believe what he had believed. His parents must have really been hypocrites and sexually active, and he just didn't know it. And so he said he was going to be Kinsey's pamphleteer. Now, in 1994, I won't be able to go into this too much today, but in 1994, Playboy sued me for libel in Holland. Why? I could get in a lot of trouble. And such a nice lady, I don't know. The judge ruled that my findings of Playboy's systemic child pornography, okay, was uncontested fact. So, a multi-million-dollar outfit, Playboy, which is run here, I gathered, by one of your newspaper people. What's the name of that newspaper? What's the name of the newspaper? Oh well, okay. Europe Press. What? Yeah? Okay, well, whatever that one is. And it's part of a, like a McDonald's franchise. So he has a Playboy franchise. So, yeah, in 1954, Playboy child sex to 2000, child sex trafficking was involved in that kind of activity. We won that lawsuit against Playboy. Playboy was, in fact, groomed naive consumers. This is very important, excuse me, for you people as medical professionals, because this is a powerfully important medical issue. Our former Surgeon General, Dr. Koop, called pornography the most important medical problem of our time. And it is indeed. We looked at how Playboy had been treating children back in the early days through cartoons. This little girl is about to have sex with this man, right? But she says it's going to cost $40. You start with cartoons and you work your way up to photographs. And here, there's a chained teenager, 1971, how one family solved its discipline problems. Things have changed from the 1950s, and we want to ask, as we began in 1970 to have extensive sex education in the classrooms, we want to ask what was the result of this education. And we're finding now that every measure of human sexual behavior has increased in dysfunction. We have massive increases in rape, we have of women, we have incredible increases in rape of children, we have increases, of course, in abortion, we have increases in venereal diseases, we have new venereal diseases that we never had before or even recognized before. If they were in a very small component of the population, and now those are general, broad spectrum. So in every measure of human sexuality, really, as you look at hard data and not emotional kind of things, I like to be free, I like to have a good time, forget it. Are you getting venereal disease of the throat? Are you getting all sorts of other diseases that are going to cause you to be infertile and everything else under the world? And if that's the case, then something is wrong. That should not be happening. So we're looking now at 4.5 million abused students. We are talking about molestation, 28% amongst our males, an enormous number amongst our females, sex education, Planned Parenthood, and has eroticized our youth. And not only that, but we're finding that 44% of our current rapists are under age 25. Now, our youth have been eroticized, hypersexualized. And when they are hypersexualized, what do people do? They act out what they've learned. I mean, you know, that's basic understanding of human behavior. Rape in and around schools has increased dramatically. We never really had it before, and now we're, depending upon whose data you're looking at, do we have 4,000 rapes? Do we have 12,000 rapes? Or did we have 19,000 rapes? Hard to say. Almost 10% of our students were targets of educators' sexual misconduct in school, and now we're finding that even females, and these are just a selection of a few, even females are involved in that. We were looking at the way in which this process took place, and that is one of the graphs over there, the full-length one for you. And we looked at the funding, we looked at who was funding the Indiana University. Playboy funded Indiana University, so did Rockefeller fund Indiana University. That's Playboy over there, that little one. And then from there developed a field of human sexuality. There was no field of human sexuality before Kinsey. It did not exist. There was no sexology field before Kinsey. It did not exist. People who had sexual issues or problems went to who? Medical doctors. They went to medical doctors, or they went to their churches or their synagogues or something like that. But they did not need some sort of sexologist to talk to them about sexual health. And indeed, it was the medical profession that was first taken over by the Kinsey people. They went to the medical profession. They began to show medical doctors pornographic materials as educational materials, and insisting that they needed to learn all that in order to be non-discriminatory and not to have any bad feelings about their patients. That then, what that did was to cause the medical profession, which had established the moral structure based upon the health needs. The morality was based upon what we knew about health. And that essentially took the medical profession out of our defense mechanism. Right now, it moved it into the sexologists. This is the director and the dean of the Institute for the Advanced Study of Human Sexuality. I bring this book with me because if you open it up, you have medical pictures, and I don't usually show those in full glory. But these are those who are actually directing the field of human sexuality education in the United States and worldwide. They have been creating the sex education curricula. Those curricula have been mass distributed, and people have been taught through these individuals. These are, in this book, the sex education faculty, staff, and students engaged in various activities in the 1970s that were illegal, and still many of them are. Who trained the global sex field becomes the question. The Institute for the Advanced Study of Human Sexuality in San Francisco, the Kinsey Institute, and those who came out of that institute. This picture of this mother and these two children were taken for the institute, and they were sold by Dr. Haberly to Hustler magazine in December 1978, in which he called for legalizing incest and ending the age of consent. Now, I understand that in June 12 to 16, Professor Haberly attended the first sexological conference in Croatia, organized by one of your professors, and it apparently was supported by the Soros Foundation. I would say that becomes problematic. As I said, I was brought here because one of your journalists addressed the Kinsey Institute, and another one of your journalists has been very active in saying, it has come out of the Kinsey Institute and does not recognize at this point, of course I've not lectured where he was, does not recognize at this point the role of Kinsey and the connection between Kinsey and the Nazi Dr. Fritz von Balyachek. All of this then takes place having a dramatic impact upon whatever is taking place in your society at your given time. We wonder about the change, the impact of the sex education on your children. Dr. Jay Gee, Chief of Brain Imaging of the Child Psychiatric Branch at National Institute of Health, has published undebated data on the way in which the child's brain is developed by age 5, age 12, age 8, and so forth. Gray matter will wane as the brain matures. 15 years of brain development here are compressed into the images, and they show the shift from the least mature, which is red, to blue, which is, So moving into that, we see that the child becomes prematurely sexualized. The teenage brain self-control center is responsible for risk-taking control, impulse control, emotional control, self-restraint, judgment. These are not developed in the teenager, and they are absolutely not developed in the young children who will be exposed to the human sexuality programs that are designed for them. This lays out the elementary. This is not my material. This comes straight from National Institute of Health. The elementary school, the middle school, the high school, we do not see cognitive brain development where children can deal with judgmental issues, make the kinds of decisions they're being told they should be making until they are past high school level. And we know that early sexual exposure endangers the child's neural systems. The psychology and physiology of trauma identifies the traumatic event. There are no data. There are no test data. There are no data that establishes human sexuality education as we see it, as founded on the Kinsey Institute, that have proven itself to be viable information, reliable information. We find in the United States, we have a federal anti-grooming act. Pedophiles gain the trust of children from unsuspecting parents. They demonstrate sex acts to children, how to masturbate, how to perform oral sex and engage in sexual intercourse. Yours doesn't do the oral sex yet. But you're certainly moving in that direction with the modules that I have seen. It is settled science. You lower sexual inhibitions, that indicates it's okay to have sex, and from that we move into some serious problems. This is in our state-mandated educator pedophile grooming, as in it's perfectly normal. These are all images that are designed for children. It states at age 10 and up. It can be lower. It depends. Oh, there was the age 10 and up. And the BBC has carried out its own version, animated living and growing, for children 7 to 9 years old. Now, Tim Tate just reported to me that the United Kingdom has now an alternative program for human sexuality. That is a viable, reliable, and good program. And he just brought a copy of that, and I was very happy to see it, because what's taking place and what has been taking place, teaching these children to masturbate, telling them to do various kinds of sexual things that they are not ready to see. And that appears to be taking place other places here in Croatia. This is one of your modules, Sex, Gender, Equity, and Responsible Sexual Behavior, allegedly to teach diversity and critical thinking. Our brain science tells us that's not based on anything. There's no justification for that concept, scientifically. Absolutely none. And parents will tell you that too. And as a matter of fact, very important for you, Croatia has the lowest rates in Europe, apparently, for teen sex activity, as looking at abortion and other kinds of related activity. This comes out of the British Daily Mail outline at the left. There's the United Kingdom. It's second only to Belgium for abortions, which means multiple partners, which means sexual disease and so forth in children under age 20. Down at the bottom, we have Greece and we have Poland. And one of the comments in the Mail was, we don't understand this because the reporter said, we in Britain have had sex education for decades. And yet, Greece and Poland do not, and they have all these lower rates of sexually transmitted diseases and so forth. Yes? I won't go into this, the gypsy moth. Oh my goodness, look up the gypsy moth. It's a fascinating study. Okay. Schools and libraries are using Kinsey's 10% fraud to groom children, to urge hetero, homo, whatever kinds of activities. And the argument again is, these children are not prepared for any kind of sexual stimuli telling them to try any sort of sexual activity. They are not in a critical analysis period of their lives for sex. They are in a visceral period, and they will process these stimuli viscerally. We are now looking at massive changes across the board. 5,200 Pentagon staffers. You know the Pentagon? Okay. downloaded child pornography in 2010. 58,200. We had 58,200 non-family child abductions in 1999. Now, I have to go back and say, how does that compare to 1950? You think we didn't notice when children are being kidnapped? You think we couldn't count? I know some of us are old, but yeah, we could count. So, this has been a major change in behavior, a major change. 64% forcible sodomy victims, boys under 12, 67% sex abuse victims are under 17 years of age. And anybody know this man's face? He was a coach. It was Sandusky. Yeah, very famous in the United States today. So, Indiana University still collects secret sex diaries. They still cover up evidence of their sex atrocities. They still receive millions in state, federal, private grants annually to support what I would call global pedo grooming. It's still identified as the most harmful book that has reached the United States of America. I thank you very much. I wish I had more time. I didn't go into enough of what he said about what everybody was doing, but I wanted to give you just an overall look at some of the major changes that have taken place and the role of Dr. Kinsey's research in that change. Thank you very much. Especially amongst medical professionals and future leaders in the health field. And in all due respect, it belongs in your hands. It belongs in the hands of parents. It belongs in the hands of the medical profession and religious profession, of course, as well. But this is your expertise. And really, you do not need to be, nor should you be, educated by sexologists. There is no track record there of success. There's only a track record of failure, which I find absolutely mind-boggling. Okay, it's time for some questions. I'm told that people can ask questions. Please? Is there a mic or something?
I can speak loud.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Your title stated, Kinsey, pedophiles who changed the world.
Mm.
Afterward, a couple of slides after that, you stated that it wasn't known whether he was actually bisexual, homosexual. It wasn't known about his personal sexual proclivities.
Mm.
How can you make such an allegation, especially since, I know your history, especially...
Do you? Ooh, you have to inform me sometime. I've read about it and I haven't followed it too well, but go on.
Especially after your lawsuit in 1991 against the Kinsey Institute. That, fell on deaf ears. And I just would like to ask,
Yes.
what is your basis for this allegation
That Kinsey was a pedophile. Well, that he collected pre-adolescent sperm, early adolescent sperm, which requires how long to check for motility? Within a period of how long? Within a period of, my medical people say it's got to be within 24 hours. That he himself, that there have been broad admissions of his relationships with, 317 children were tortured under his direction. And that he has admitted that he was part of that. Now, and that he lied for I don't know how many years about the sexual torture of these children, that he viewed sex between a man who raped a child and the child as a viable sexual activity. People don't do that unless they believe in it and practice it. And that, you just start reading, and don't just read the publicity, but you can read some of my books too. And you simply look at his own work. And then you come to, then you come to your conclusions. When the Nazis carried out their experiments on human beings, and called that science, we knew that they were not science and that they had special interests in their own hearts. And we know that the same thing here. We've had numerous admissions from Kinsey and from his own people of the same thing. So you ought to go on YouTube, look at some of the documentaries which are more explicit about that. Now, let's see, what was the other thing? About the lawsuits. Yeah, the Kinsey Institute has fought me tooth and nail. They have a little money, and I ran out of money, and so I couldn't continue the lawsuit, but I'm hoping to correct that in the future. We have admissions, we have victims. Those victims have come forward. We have a young man, who was a young man at the time, has come forward, who was sexually involved with Kinsey, and so on and so on. So, don't worry about that. Start paying attention to how this material was gathered. Next question, please. Yes?
Yeah. Do I speak up, or can I just speak up, right? Okay. I too have, I heard the news yesterday, and so the first thing I did, I figured, okay, perhaps I should go to your website and check some of those things out. Unfortunately, I haven't had that much time to go and read all the scientific papers, but I have read some of your own articles, and one of that struck me the hardest was actually the one that you and I believe Mrs. McAllister perhaps co-signed. And from that article, I actually, my first thought, because at the conclusion of the article, you basically at one point state that we, the Judeo-Christians, have to stand up for our convictions and our beliefs and have to defend this in front of the law. So my point, my feeling at that time was that what the article was about was not so much about the science behind it all, but much more about the way we perceive the world and what moral codes do we decide to take.
So what is your question?
Wait a minute.
No, I'm here to
Molim
speak, but I
kratka,
would like
koncizna,
to.
precizna pitanja vezana za temu.
No, I would like a question.
Okay. So,
What's your question?
when you came here, and first of all, thank you for the presentation. It's an interesting,
Good.
to say the
Okay.
least.
Okay.
My question is,
Yeah.
you explained the how. You
Mhm.
explained the what. What I didn't feel is the why. So for
Why
example,
Kinsey did this?
One moment.
No, excuse me, I'm trying to understand your
I will
question.
explain it just now.
Okay.
Molim vas preciznije skratite.
Honestly, I don't care about who Kinsey wants. Whether von Braun was a Nazi and the United States government used his data to basically send the man to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that should happen or not,
Right.
honestly, I have my moral dilemmas about that. What my point is,
I'm asking for your question.
so what you're saying here is against Kinsey. My question is, are some of the things that have happened, like legalization of homosexuality, like teaching children what is sexual intercourse, like teaching children what a condom is, I'm not saying that they should be taught very early on, but my question is, are you basing this?
Ja vas molim,
Okay, that's a good question.
Are you basing all of this
Yeah.
on a personal vendetta of Kinsey and perhaps traditional moral values? Or are you basing this on science and critical data?
Read the data.
I did.
Another question?
molim vas ako ima neko još vrlo kratko,
Yes.
koncizno pitanje.
Hi, I just wanted to comment on what you said.
Ja se ispričavam, dozvoljavam samo kratka, precizna pitanja vezana za temu iz publike. Iz publike. Ok, molim vas, uzmite mjesto onda u publici, postavite pitanje.
Oh, but I didn't mean to be flippant. I apologize.
I am actually
Well,
from the public.
Okay.
je, u redu, postavite pitanje, ne možete tražiti predavačicu u njezin mikrofon i doći na njezino mjesto
Okay, hold
postaviti
on.
pitanje.
I'm sorry. But let me just add, when I said read the data, I meant go back and look at the scientific reports from Kinsey, and you make your own decision. Yes?
How does children's brain understand the information that are present in the sexual education? Can they understand what's in the books of the sexual education, or they have to know the context of that information?
Well, I hope that the brain scans coming out of National Institute of Health helped people to understand why sexual material, explicit certainly sexual material, is totally and completely out of the child's capacity to process. That is why we don't, it's monkey see, monkey do. And people practice. I mean, that's what children do. That's what they're brought up to do. They learn by doing. So they go into school, you teach them, you say, this is how you add, and this is how you go home and do homework. And they go home and they do their homework. So the question becomes, when we give them sexual materials, what kind of homework are they doing, So, and I have a great deal of information on that, and if we had about 3 hours, we could go into it. But I urge you to go, and the gentleman with that question, I urge you all to go to the C-SPAN document that is now available. It's a 2-hour presentation by me, giving a presentation to the law school students. And I urge you to go to that and explore further. This is the first time you have heard this, isn't it? Yeah, okay. If it's the first time that you've been hearing this kind of information, explore that yourselves. Explore that yourselves. Get Kinsey's books, go look at the documents, think for yourselves. That's why you are here, you university people. Yes?
Ok, još jedno zadnje pitanje prije nego što se zahvalimo Medicinskom fakultetu na ljubaznom gostoprimstvu.
Thank you. I just like to ask one thing. You've shown us moral credit of Dr. Kinsey. You've shown us the changes in the society in the United States and some other countries. And you made a link, you hypothesized on causality between the two. But what you have shown is only temporal relationship. We didn't see any evidence on causal relationship between the two, between the Kinsey reports, between the sexual education in schools and the moral deterioration and child abuse which occurred afterwards. And such causation cannot be made on such studies which only show temporal relationships. So do you have any studies which would give evidence of causation, causal and consequence, or not?
The question was, do we have evidence? Well, of causation. Well, first of all, we have evidence that the entire field of human sexuality education is based on Kinsey. That's evidence. That's not debatable. That's fact. That it shifted from the medical profession to the sexology profession is evidence. It is fact. Huh? Then we have to look at, I see your arm and that's up to her. So let me just try to answer this. Yeah. And I know that in many schools you're still taught that you have to have cause effect, otherwise there's no relation. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
No.
Excuse me. Let me finish. When you see, use your own minds, your own powers of observation, we can say that children act out what they see very often, depending upon the child. And yes, there's a lot of causal, in fact, if you want to go to causal, we have a lot of trauma-based cause-effect. I suggest that you look on my website, look up some of the material that I've talked about, and see Perry, I think it's Perry, who has a huge website on the relationship between what children are reading and seeing and so forth, and subsequent trauma, brain trauma. The data on the brain are not debatable. That's simply fact. You can't argue it. And if I had about 3 hours more, I suppose we could go further, but I'll leave it.
Evo jedno kratko i zadnje pitanje. Biće dobrodošli ste s pitanjima nakon sučeljavanja. Pozvani ste da pače sutra u 19 sati u hotel Westin. Spremite svoja pitanja, ako može u okviru pristojnog. Da pače, otvoreni smo za sve kritike.
Very short. In your opinion, when does the childhood stops and the adulthood starts?
That's not my opinion. Let me answer it.
Is it when the girls get their first periods, or is it 16, 17, 20, 25? Because what I picked up is that you don't have a problem with adults being sexual, only children. Or is that something that I've misunderstood?
There's physical maturity and there's mental and emotional maturity. And it, of course, depends on the child to a certain extent, not to a great extent. But I don't know how you're taught here in the medical school, but I'm sure you guys have clear-cut definitions as to when people become mature, physically mature. We try to establish the notion of physical maturity for sexual activity as 16, 18, depending on, the countries. Some countries, it's 13. Would you agree with that? Yeah, so, in some countries it can be even younger, depending. And we had in the United States of America, in the old days, it took a great fight to get it up, but we had 8 years old at a certain point in time. Some of our lawyers who have fought for Kinsey, if you watch the C-SPAN piece, some of our lawyers who fought for Kinsey said that it ought to be 7 years of age, all right? No, so there's a certain amount of logic, of observation, of your own intelligence, much less anything else that's written, that ought to determine your understanding of what is mature and when it's time for children to be sexually involved. Yeah.
U redu, evo zahvaljujemo se Medicinskom fakultetu na ljubaznom gostoprimstvu u ime organizatora. Pozvali ste na ostale javne tribine i eto toliko od nas.